Writing developed first probably in the Sumerian cities of southern Iraq, southern Mesopotamia. Although in Egypt, writing developed about the same time independently, but there was interaction between the Sumerians and the Egyptians. Basically, all of these civilizations that developed these urban-based, complex societies developed writing for the elites to control and to administer the complex transactions that were taking place. So initially, a lot of writing had to do with products that are coming into the palace or the temple, products going out, keeping track of the tax revenue coming in, keeping track of the produce going out. So this is an initial sort of purpose for writing.
Mesopotamian writing started actually as what you might call a logographic system, where each character stood for a word. So if you wanted to represent the word water, you'd have a symbol that stood for water. Now, very often these symbols were also pictographic, meaning it was a picture of the actual object being represented. But not every character was pictographic. The character for sheep is a circle with a cross in the middle, and it's not a picture of a sheep. So somehow they came up with this symbol, but the point was that the word sheep got its own character.
This logographic system worked in the early Bronze Age, but with nearly 1,000 characters, memorizing all of them proved too inefficient. Over time, a new system developed into what's known as cuneiform.
Cuneiform, it comes from the Latin. It means wedge-shaped. But think about a bird stepping in ink and walking across the page. That's kind of what you've got, except that it's made with reeds being pushed into wet clay. And the tablets are small, kind of pillow-shaped.
So instead of a curvy line for the sign for water, you would just have two wedges making a straight line. There's a sign for fish, but it gets turned into a set of wedges, and you'd never have known that originally it was making the shape of a fish.
In Egypt, one of the pictographic writing systems survived and eventually developed into Egyptian hieroglyphics.
When we look at cuneiform versus Egyptian hieroglyphic, we see a real difference. And that is that with cuneiform, it began as administrative use. So it was really meant for writing on tablets, so very small sort of media. Whereas with Egyptian hieroglyphic, a very different purpose from the very beginning. That kind of writing was meant for monumental sculpture, monumental paintings. So the actual writing had to be large, and because it accompanied these artworks, it had to be artful. So what we see in Egypt is a long development of hieroglyphic writing as an art form.
In Egypt and Mesopotamia, large central institutions, such as the palace and temple, evolved into highly sophisticated administrative centers. The Bronze Age elites who ruled these institutions were acquiring a surplus of food and other goods from the rest of the population, while employing huge numbers of people to help run their cities. Raw materials were also coming into city centers through extensive trade networks. Writing allowed civilizations to prosper with better record-keeping, stronger taxation, and greater communication over long distances. Letters, contracts, and other important texts were written with the help of an elite class of professional scribes.
To be trained as a scribe, you had to go through rather rigorous years of schooling. And there are texts both from Mesopotamia and Egypt that talk about what it was like to go to school to learn how to read and write, and it wasn't fun. It was usually reserved for boys. Occasionally you know of girls, women who could read and write. It wasn't that common. And in general, it does seem to have been limited to a small number of people, and I suppose they had a pretty good lifestyle compared to most people. In the Egyptian texts, they talk about it's a kind of these texts that are advertisements for a scribal way of life, and they talk about how horrible it is to be a farmer, how dangerous it is to be a soldier. Be a scribe, you'll do really well. You know, it's like, I guess the equivalent of like telling your kid to be a doctor is there's job security and you'll get paid pretty well.
So there would have been resident scribes at these palaces, and they are responsible for very, very important diplomatic relationships. And in the same way that you can imagine a translator at the UN today has an incredible load, these scribes also had incredible weight on them to be able to kind of handle the finesses of correspondence between very important people in the world at that time.
The scribes recorded the yearly histories for the kings and rulers. They recounted celebrations, campaigns, and conquests. They also drafted letters from one ruler to another.
Well, a lot of the letters start out with, "Say to Amenhotep, king of Egypt, thus says Tushratta, king of," and what is happening is one scribe is telling the other scribe to read this out loud because the king can't read. Sometimes, on a couple of them, we have a handwritten ink inscription from one scribe to another. "Hey Joe, it's Phil. How's the wife and kids? By the way, when you read this out loud, please emphasize the third line down. Look forward to hearing from you again." And so we've got these private messages that the kings never knew. Now, it doesn't happen that often, but just enough to instill the humanity in these dry and dusty documents.
In the Aegean, where the Minoans flourished during the Middle Bronze Age, a large number of scribes and bureaucrats helped run the day-to-day operations of the palace. Writing also played an important role in Minoans' ritual life and their extensive system of trade.
Cretan hieroglyphic develops on Crete, and then probably just a little bit later, we have Linear A developing, a very exciting name for what it seems to be essentially a cursive version of Cretan hieroglyphic. And these are active in different parts of the island. Now, neither of these scripts have been deciphered.
To the north of Crete, the Mycenaean culture rose on the mainland of Greece toward the end of the Middle Bronze Age and into the Late Bronze Age. The Mycenaeans adapted the Minoan Linear A system to create Linear B, which is now known to record an early form of Greek. Unlike Linear A, Linear B has been deciphered.
We now can read Linear B documents. So we have the wages that are being given to different workers within the palace. We have record of dedications that are being made at different shrines, etc. So they are not very exciting just by themselves, but they can be opened up to really help us understand how the Mycenaean palace system, how it worked. And that has been incredibly useful.